Hey everybody, and thanks for tuning in to the Ephrata Community Church weekly podcast. Conversation with our pastors and leaders meant to continue encouraging you to know God, know freedom, know purpose, and make a difference.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hey, thanks for joining us for this week's podcast. And Stephanie and I are just going to take a moment and reflect a little bit on this past weekend's message. I do want to report back to you that last week, of course, last Wednesday, Stephanie was here at the as part of the podcast as well. And it took a certain level of arm twisting to make that happen. And I'm just simply saying that here it is 1 week later, and it took less arm twisting to be part of this podcast today than what it was last week. So is there a reason for that?
Well, he gave me a half hour's notice. And so.
See, actually, I think spontaneity is actually better than having a long notice. And so, because I know if I gave her like, hey, next week you're going to do this, she would think about it for the entire week. So it's helpful for me to say, just we'll be on there in 30 minutes. We'll talk about a few things. That way she's only stressed for 30 minutes rather than for 7 days.
That's about right. I woke up this morning. I couldn't do a thing with my hair because I'm in desperate need of a haircut. And I thought, it doesn't matter. I'm in the back office. Nobody will see me. So here I am. So I think Kevin owes me big time.
All right. Well, okay. So anyhow, changing the subject on that, I do want to go back and talk a little bit about this past weekend. Of course, this past weekend, we did finish up our series on radical relationships, the art of peacemaking. And we would have ended up spending 3 weeks. It wasn't planned this way because we moved the Jeff and Shanti Feldheim marriage weekend till May. But so we weren't planning on all of that, but we did end up spending 3 specific weeks on the art of peacemaking rather than just simply 2. So even as we head on beyond this specific message series, I would encourage you to not move on from that. Matter of fact, this past weekend, we had specific prophetic words, impression from the Lord about encouraging the congregation that if you've taken steps towards peacemaking and it didn't work out quite the way you expected or you didn't get that response, to not give up, but just continue to present that before the Lord, do what you can in that way. And so we even believed for relationships that we would consider to be impossible. Jacob and Esau was our biblical example of that. And so I want to encourage you in that. So even as we move beyond this specific series, let's not move beyond peacemaking, and may it be a regular part of our life. But this last weekend, as we finished this series up on relationship, I was challenged with the idea of presenting just a message with some guidelines of those that are single and maybe potentially looking for a spouse or thinking about looking for a spouse. And one of the things we mentioned this past weekend was it's not just simply young adults, but it is for all stages of life. And even for parents who have navigated their kids, help their kids navigate that season, which we both have been there, as well as the fact that for both of us, we both had stepmothers. And so we've actually been on the other side of that, whereas children of our parents, that they actually navigated that season. So it's quite a broad topic, but I want to mention 3 things specifically from this past weekend. One is I felt like the apology to singles was something that was significant. I'll oftentimes go into a message, with having the leading of the Lord, but then just getting that impression of the Lord, like this needs to be done and it's important. And I would have felt that way specifically when it came to the apology to singles. I'm not sure the church has done a very good job of actually ministering to singles, and I'm not sure if it's cultural for us here that we feel like we have people in our congregation getting married at 20, 21 years old, and at the same time we have others that are waiting to 25, 27, 28, and even into the 30s, and we've even had folks wait into their 40s for even a first marriage. And I really want people to be content with that.
That was actually one of my favorite parts of his sermon. I had never heard anybody apologize in a sermon before to singles, and that just meant a lot to me and to a lot of people. There's several people I know that just say they've never wanted to get married, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Yep.
And I think I think it was a great thing, apologizing, because it's important.
Yeah, and the foundation for that was out of 1 Corinthians 7:17, in which the Apostle Paul, it's literally right in the heart of an entire chapter on marriage. And he just simply says, listen, what you need to do is you need to live the life that God's called you to live. Mm-hmm. So he's wrestling with, okay, there's advantages to being married, but he's also wrestling like, hey, there's a significant advantages of being single. And so to have the expectation that their marriage needs to be, so in some cases, someone's 20 or 21 years old and there's pressure coming like, hey, find a spouse, get married, where maybe they're in a stage of life or they have goals in life that they want to fulfill before they get married. And we just need to be careful that we don't put undue pressure on people or have our own expectations placed upon people. We want to encourage them to live the life for the Lord. And like you said, there are those that are single that just marriage is just not in the picture for them. And I think we need to be honoring and respectful of that. And even when it comes to the idea of singles ministry, which I struggle with because, and that's not just in this area, but in general, like how do we have age-specific ministry or even life stage-specific ministry without segregating people? So oftentimes we'll have connect groups that are young marrieds with kids. We have connect groups that are retired folks that have empty nests. And it's good to have specific ministry, but then I think we're missing out on the benefit of intergenerational ministry in different life stages. And I have a real heart and value for us just seeking the Lord together.
And I'd also encourage single people especially to be satisfied where they are instead of pining away that they're not married or they're not where they want to be. Just do whatever the Lord is calling you to do right now. And so I feel kind of bad for people that maybe get married later in life and they said they wasted so many of their years just being upset at being single.
Yep.
And just say wherever the Lord has you, be happy in that, and then just move forward as he leads you.
I think I can say this for the record that Stephanie was never unhappy being single. I think I'm pretty much needed to convince her. Right?
Yeah, I was pretty much happy all my life, yeah. I mean, obviously bad things happen, but you just deal with whatever comes. So.
Yeah, so a couple other points I wanted to bring out from this past weekend just for us to talk about just briefly here. But also I felt like I wanted to, another goal that I had for the weekend messages is to tell single people to be free to explore possibilities. And what I meant by exploring possibilities, like if you feel like there's someone that you aren't sure, but just someone that you're interested in getting to know a little bit better, for people to feel free to do that. I feel like as Christians, we tend to over spiritualize things. Like I need to be led of the Lord to do everything. And I know Rob realizes obviously we want to be led of the Lord, but sometimes I wonder if God's waiting in heaven saying like, you know how to do, like, you know what you need to do. Like you don't need me to specifically tell you. So we may over spiritualize things, and then specifically as a charismatic congregation where we expect the Holy Spirit's work in us, that sometimes we would tend to make a very practical experience super spiritual. Like we need to hear from God on this. And then I feel like for a lot of young people, it can actually put them in a sense of bondage where they're not quite sure. They're almost afraid, like, hey, if I ask someone out on a date or we ask to go to coffee and we just have conversation, is that crossing a boundary? And I would clearly say, no, it's not.
I agree completely. Some people think that they can only date one person, or if somebody asks them out, they have to marry them. I'm like, that would have freaked me out. I never would have dated anybody if I had thought I had to marry him right away. So.
Yeah, and all that can be done with absolute purity. And like it's not like all those things that are protective aspects to a relationship like that. So in other words, you want to protect the heart of the other. So in other words, you don't want to lead someone on in a relationship that's not clear. Like you want to be clear about that. The sexual boundaries are, that's pretty obvious. I'm not sure we need to talk too much about that. But you can do that in a way that's completely pure and completely protective of the person that you're around, just as a way of being honest. But I feel like there's been so many parameters placed around that people really feel somewhat restricted. And ultimately, I would want to, give people freedom. And then one thing I want to mention as well is that I think people were a little surprised that when we talked about like women actually initiating something like that. Mm-hmm. So people were really shocked. I'm not sure that's quite the right word, but I would have even gotten some feedback a little bit later on about that and the possibility of, well, aren't men supposed to lead the relationship? And yeah, okay, that can be true. That's not, we're talking about necessarily a lifetime of leadership. And even as you come together as husband and wife, Like, I think we lead together. And so we do life together, and so many things we work out together in that way. But again, I'm still coming back to the point where for a woman to just kind of make someone aware that, hey, it's interested. Like, if you would ask me out, I wouldn't say no. Or if you want to go to coffee sometime, let me know. Like, those kind of things that initiate a relationship, I can't find any biblical restrictions. That's what it comes down to. Like, culturally, we might struggle with some of those things, but I can't find any biblical restrictions that say a woman can't do something like that.
I agree completely. Yeah. I think for either sex, just go for it. Don't be afraid. Don't let fear hold you back, because you might regret it. Several years ago, I was talking to somebody that we had known, since he was maybe in middle school. And he was still single, and we were talking about some people from our past, and he said that there was a girl that he liked, and he was really good friends with her, and she was just good friends with a bunch of people. It was a group of people that hang out together. And he said he always wished he had asked her out, but he was afraid to. And I had known the man that she married. They were all three good friends, and she ended up marrying the other guy and had kids with him and everything. And she definitely would have said yes if he had asked her out, because I knew them. And she definitely had interest in him, but he never asked. And yeah, so it was very sad. So don't let that hold you back. If somebody says no, tough beans, move on, it's okay. It's okay. But I know it's hard, and I think we do people a disservice when we show no interest at all. I mean, give the guy a break or the girl a break. You can, let him know, that you are somewhat interested.
Yep. Yeah. It's a big deal to ask someone out like that. Okay, being friends or maybe being even an acquaintance, that next step of, hey, would you go to coffee with just me, is a pretty big deal. So it's hard for, like in the case where a guy's going to ask someone out, it's hard for a guy to actually take that step. It's a very significant step at times. But then if there's any way in which the young lady can give a little bit of a hint, like, hey, that's why the young lady possibly taking a bit of initiative can be very, very helpful in that whole process, for sure. That's very, very helpful. And the final thing I want to mention as well, like we talked a little bit about our experience from a long time ago of how we got together. And then I shared about Gloria Das and Perdita in southern India, Duncan and Vasanti in Bangalore. And so we have this almost like the extreme examples where I found you, asked you out. We got to know each other a little bit better. I would have taken you home to visit my dad at that point. My mother was no longer living, but also some family members, so it's radically different from like Gloria Das and Perdita, where just simply said, hey, Dad, go find me a wife. And he just simply did that. So I do feel like actually both elements are very, very important, where you have the opportunity of finding, but that's where the whole community comes into place, where we have friends that can speak into our lives. We have parents that we can say, hey, what do you think? Or what's your, would you give your blessing to this relationship? Do you have any thoughts specifically about that balance between, taking initiative and going and finding a wife, but also have other people speaking into that process?
I just think it's great to have feedback from other people, because a lot of times love is blind. You hear that all the time, and it's very true. And other people are more objective, and they can see into things. If they see something's a little bit off with somebody, I would just heed other people's advice, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, so I feel like we can walk in this balance of both taking some initiative on our own, while at the same time getting feedback from others and input from others as well. So anyhow, it's we explored some both experiences that we're aware of, both for ourselves as well as some people that we know around the world. And then we explore a little bit about some things that happen in the Bible. And wow, there's a diverse way that God has brought people together. Some of it's not always been good, but always redemptive as well. And so we wanted to give a little bit of a parameter. It'd be nice to go to the Bible and just simply say that, hey, here's chapter and verse and 5 easy steps. Doesn't exist in the Bible, at least from what I'm aware of. But there are some things that we can learn from where, hey, it's okay to be single. Consider character, get community, consider that kind of input there as well. Take the initiative. And in the process of all of that, we want you to honor God in your relationship. So I'd encourage you in that. And marriage is a great thing. Singleness is a great thing. And we all want to live the life that God has for us in that process.
And choose people who are good looking on the inside. I tell you what, that's important. Friends and spouses, just anybody in your life. Make sure they, like you said, have good character.
Just in case you didn't notice, Stephanie's a little bit of a romantic. And so she would encourage you in this way if you need a little bit actually specific help. No, for real, right?
Okay.
Yeah. Talk to her. She'll help you out. She helps me out all the time. Hey, thanks so much for joining us today. This coming weekend, we're getting into a new message series that we're calling Unbreakable. We're talking about foundational elements of the Christian faith. It's leading into our Easter celebration coming up in just a month away. We're going to have a Good Friday service, which is going to be a communion service. And then, of course, our Easter weekend services. And look forward to you being a part of all of that. Thanks again for joining us. Thanks, Stephanie, for helping me again. You help me all the time. Thanks.
Sure. See ya.
Hey, thanks again for joining us today. We hope that you've been encouraged by listening and that you'll join us again next week. You can listen to previous episodes, find additional resources, and of course, learn more about us by visiting EphrataCommunityChurch.com.